Alright guys, today we're going to be reacting to why Germans don't buy houses. Interesting. My first impression is because there's not a lot of space in Germany. This is what I'm thinking about, right? And based on what we learn is a lot of things have to do with what happened in World War II. Supposedly, right? Supposedly. I don't know how accurate this is. This is based on the Ashton video that we watched last time. There was some remarks on why a lot of Germans don't simply buy a house. There's a lot of renters mentality behind it. But we've seen a very good movement of some people just buying some houses, and we reacted to some of those houses. Actually, I'm going to react after this one. I'm going to react to the part 8 of how to build a house in Germany. Very interesting video. You learn a lot. We're going to be reacting to this one. Make sure you like to subscribe, please. A lot of you guys are not subscribing. Make sure you subscribe to my channel. And make sure you're part of the Discord and check out our links. And that way you can help the channel as well. In the meantime, let's jump in.
Your last fall, which makes me the first one out of all of my German friends to do that, and probably even the first one who has even thought about it. Here in the US, however, I have plenty of friends my age who own their own home. I feel like it's quite normal here to buy a house, even at a younger age, and pay off the mortgage instead of paying rent. And in a lot of cases, people just sell their houses again after a few years and move somewhere else, or simply upgrade to something nicer. Germany, on the other hand, is known as a nation of renters. I know that this comes as quite a surprise to most people, but more than half of all Germans actually live in a rented place, and only about 45% of Germans live in a place that
you know what?
they
That's
or someone
crazy,
else
but that's kind of high though. That's kind of high. I mean, 45% is not a bad number, right? And I would like to see the numbers by generations, right? Because I know Generation Z and Generation Millennials like me, we rent a lot because, of course, what happened in 2008, a lot of these houses that went up afterwards, a lot, very high, right? So we have a huge bubble that hasn't exploded yet. But we are renting, right? We're renting. We don't have the money to just buy a house. So I would like to see those numbers.
Household own. Now, the reason why this is so surprising is that Germany is the country with the biggest economy in Europe and one of the biggest ones in the world. So naturally, you would think that a wealthy country like this has plenty of people that own their own real estate. But the truth is, Germany actually ranks among the last places in the developed world when it comes to home ownership rates.
That is
Out
interesting.
of all European countries, only Switzerland has a lower rate than us. These numbers are a little bit older. Most of these countries
Spain,
don't
83,
release new
wow.
numbers regularly, but it really hasn't changed all that much. Germany is still in that same rank today, so it's a helpful graphic to visualize the differences. But how does this make sense? How does a wealthy country like Germany have a lower homeownership rate than poorer countries such as Spain, Greece, or Mexico? Let's talk about it.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a good question.
So of course, it's not like no German in the entire country owns a house. The title of this video is obviously somewhat of an exaggeration. I personally grew up in a residential neighborhood in Munich where most people did own their homes. Granted, the majority of those houses were row houses or duplexes with a rather small yard where only
those are nice solar panels
dividing you from your neighbor's patio and yard. But even that is already a pretty big luxury in
That's
a
that
large
nice
German city
solar
like
panel.
Munich, because we generally don't have as much space as people do here in the US, where it's standard to have a standalone house with a front yard, backyard, and your own garage or driveway. If you want to hear more about how German and American houses are different, you can check out this video, by the way. It's linked up here. But we're going to stick with home ownership versus renting today. And in Munich, which is one of the most densely populated and expensive cities in Germany, you'd have to pay a fortune to get something like what I just described as standard in the US.
Okay.
Even buying a 2-bedroom apartment in Munich costs more than a 5-bedroom house here in Cincinnati. But that's just a side note, because that's not
Oh,
actually
she lives
the
in
reason for the
Cincinnati,
low
Ohio,
homeownership rate in Germany. And of course,
Cincinnati.
Munich and Cincinnati are two cities that you can't really compare price-wise. It's just a little glimpse into my personal reality when looking at
Ohio,
where I'm
Cincinnati,
from
man.
and
That's
where I live now.
kind of Midwest kind of feel to it. I'm guessing in Cincinnati, Ohio, you might have lower prices for the houses than Munich.
What I can afford here. But first, let's look at the facts.
Let's
As
go.
I just said, the majority of all Germans live in a rental property, and that applies especially to younger and older people. According to this survey by the Deutsche Bundesbank from 2017, it's about 85% of the 25 to 34-year-olds who rent their home, 71% of the 35 to 44-year-olds, and 52% of those over 75. So the highest homeowner rates are among the people between 45 and 74. In that age group, the homeowner rate is at 54 to 60%, so more than half of all people in that age group do own their own home, and only 40 to 46% are renters. Over the last 10 years, the homeownership rate in Germany has only slightly increased, by the way. The homeownership rate also varies within Germany and is different from state to state, with the highest rate of about 65% in the Saarland and the lowest rate of 17% in Berlin. What's interesting is that overall, there are fewer homeowners.
Hey, why is that? Why here has the lowest rate and this one has the highest rate?
In the so-called new states
That'll
of
be a
Germany,
good question.
Neue Bundesländer, so in former East Germany, than in West German states,
Well, that
which
makes
seems
sense.
to be a remnant from the GDR. About 90% of all rental units in Germany are located in multi-family homes. That's a very common type of building that you'll see all over the country, in historical districts, in newly built neighborhoods, in the city centers, and in the suburbs. Eastern Germany is even known for a specific type of multi-family building called Plattenbau. Those buildings consist of prefabricated concrete sheets, Platten, and were mainly used to build quick and cheap housing after World War II, but you'll find these buildings in other parts of Germany as well.
That looks kind of communist, right? That's the thing. They look very communist-ish.
Now let's get to the reasons as to why the homeownership rate in Germany is so low. I did mention that real estate prices in Munich are extremely high, so you might think, well, duh, houses are just a lot more expensive in Germany than in other countries, so fewer people can afford buying a house. But
Better
actually,
quality of life
even though
too.
in some cities, such as Munich, but also Hamburg or Frankfurt, real estate prices are indeed very high, the average house in Germany only costs around 320,000 euros, or at least
You know what? That's
very,
that's almost the same as here. Almost the same as here. You put things into perspective. How much it costs here? 250,000, 200,000? I mean, did you get a little bit closer to the city? Maybe 300,000? It's very similar.
could find for a nationwide average, because the prices are usually listed per city and not for the entire country. And according to this article by the German news outlet Focus, when you compare the average price for 1 square meter of real estate to the average household income in Germany, the rate is actually very similar to other countries.
Yeah.
So an average household in Germany could purchase about 4 square meters of real estate with their yearly net income. That's actually the 5th best rate in the European Union. In many other countries, the average household can afford way less than that. Yet they do own more real estate than Germans. And one reason for that is that you don't necessarily have to purchase a home to own it. You can also inherit it. And that's something that just
That's something
doesn't take
different,
place
yes.
quite as much in Germany. About half of all German homeowners are currently paying off a mortgage, which indicates that they bought the house themselves. While in Romania, the country with the highest homeownership rate in the world, only about 1% of owners pay off a mortgage. Why is that? Well, there simply isn't quite as much to inherit in Germany, which, of course, has historical reasons. About 20%
Yeah, I mean,
of
she had a point. Just, everything got blown. So there's no houses. What? So there's no property to pass on. And I think that has to do why a lot of people are not buying, doesn't have houses. They cannot sell it. I mean, a house is just basically investment. And you think about it. Not only if you want to sell it, but if you want to pass it on to the new kids. Let's say you have 5 kids, and 3 of them, they already have their own house. At least 2 of them can keep the house, and so on and so
German housing
forth.
stock was destroyed during World War II, about 2.3 million homes. An additional
Yeah, I'm
2
telling
million
you.
were damaged, and including
Yeah,
the
it's a lot.
refugees from the Eastern occupation zone, about 21 million people needed a home. So in the
That's
first
crazy,
few years
man.
after the war, West Germany needed to come up with a plan to provide a lot of housing, about 5.5 million homes to be exact, as quickly as possible. And they had to do it in the midst of a broken economy, with the currency being virtually worthless and a population who didn't have a lot of financial means. The best way to solve the situation was to build government-subsidized social housing in the form of apartment units that people could rent for a reasonable price. The first housing program started right after the end of the war, when there wasn't even an official state and government in place yet, but shortly after the Federal Republic of Germany was officially founded in 1949, the government did also pass the first housing law. Wohnungsbaugesetz, with the goal of having
That's
as many
oh my
people as
God.
possible benefit from
One of
this.
those long
The
names.
government ended up funding about 3.3 million homes. 2.7 million were built by private investors that were given access to subsidies, low interest rates, and tax breaks.
Yeah,
So
this really have the private investors. That's a huge boost, huge one. $2.7 million on private investment as per unit, right? That's a lot of money, man.
Germany managed to cut the housing shortage in half by 1956. And
That's
due
crazy.
to the fact that there wasn't really a high demand for private real estate at the time because of the financial situation, banks were hardly giving out loans, and multifamily homes could house more people. Most of those newly built homes were rentals. The foundation for Germany's preference to rent was laid. Other countries that were affected by the war, such as the United Kingdom, for example, actually had similar strategies after the war. Still, today, the homeownership rate in the UK is significantly higher, with about 65%. In 2004,
wow, that's a lot, right?
So the big question is, why did the Germans stick with
Spain,
renting? Even
this Spain that has a lot, bro, like 80 something percent. Wow. That makes sense why I like to. That makes sense why Puerto Ricans are very into the owning a home. Well, that's bullshit because Americans are into buying a home. I don't know. There's something going on there, right? Puerto Ricans are very into buying a home. I'm saying like everybody in my family. I would say not everybody, but I would say like 80 or 75% of my family, they own homes, and they really respect their homes. It's interesting.
After the economy recovered and the country experienced the so-called Wirtschaftswunder in the 1950s.
Yep.
One of the answers seems to lie in how much money was put into rentals. Since the UK mainly targeted their housing programs at public and non-profit institutions, excluding the private sector,
Yep.
and kept up renting and construction cost caps for public housing developers, most rental property was of significantly lower quality than privately owned homes because landlords had to cut back in maintenance. As a result, rentals in the UK, especially those that were largely publicly funded, acquired somewhat of a stigma. In Germany, on the other hand, rental regulations were reduced much sooner, in the early 1960s, and the policies were more balanced between the private and the public sector, so that rental housing has stayed of relatively high quality in Germany and is oftentimes nicer than privately owned places in countries like Croatia, Slovakia, or Romania. Which
That's
goes to show
interesting.
that owning your own home doesn't always necessarily equal a better housing quality. And German renters.
Good point. Because when you own your home, you have to be responsible for your home. So that means that you don't have the property managers. You know, you don't have the HOAs or not HOA, but and people that work in the building that they can take care of your wash and dryer not working or if your plumbing not working. They take care of that. You don't have that. So that means that you have to take care. If you're a homeowner, you have to take care of all that out of your own pocket. That makes a lot of sense.
Seem to be very happy. According to a 2007 survey by the OECD, more than 93% of Germans said that they were satisfied with their current housing situation. One factor that probably contributes to that satisfaction is that there are a lot of regulations in place to protect tenants in Germany. This includes rent caps that limit rent increases to no more than 20% over a 3-year period. In some cities, it's even 15%. In cities with a particularly tight housing market, we also have a so-called rent price brake since 2015, a rent control, Mietpreisbremse, that keeps landlords from raising rents unreasonably above the local rent index, Mietspiegel. And turns out that rents in Germany are actually cheaper than in many other countries. A one-bedroom apartment in Germany costs about 700 euros a month on average. It's obviously going to be more expensive in a city like Munich, while the nationwide average here in the US for a one-bedroom apartment is at 1,100 US dollars.
Damn, bro.
In addition to
That's a lot
that,
of money.
leases are usually unlimited in Germany.
That's a lot of money.
Unlike in the US, where a standard lease ends after 1 year, and terminating a lease in Germany comes with quite a few rules, especially on the landlord's end. Both parties usually have to give a 3-month notice, unless the lease agreement says otherwise, and if tenants have lived in the place for over 5 years, the landlord even has to notify them 6 or even 9 months before. Also, landlords can't terminate a lease without having a good reason. That can include the tenant being late with their payments, of course.
Tenant late or you being an ass, you get kicked out. Hey, I'm just keeping 100 with you guys. That's what happened. You start being an ass, man, you get kicked out.
But also when the landlord needs the place to live in it themselves or for family. That's called Eigenbedarf. They do have to show evidence of this need though, and they can't terminate the lease when they want to sell the place. So landlords are often pretty restricted when wanting to end a lease and often have to overcome a lot of obstacles, which means that tenants don't have to worry about just being kicked out at any given time. And that provides a lot of extra security. Now, besides all of the upsides of renting in Germany, the German government also just doesn't provide as many incentives to buy your own home as other countries do. Even though there is a homeowner program, the KfW Wohneigentumsprogramm, that gives people who want to buy or build their own home access to low interest loans, it doesn't seem to be enough for people to buy more real estate and even out the lack in tax breaks. Because
I mean, the thing is, in my personal opinion, is, I mean, even though 80 million people on the side of Germany, it's a lot of people, man. Unless you want to just start expanding to the outside of the nature, which I don't see Germany doing. I mean, if you want to do it, that's fine. But you have to understand that if let's say that all of a sudden German population start growing, there has to be somewhere that people can expand, right? Unless you want to go crazy and, you know what I'm saying, and start, reclaiming some land. I don't know. That's another topic that I don't know it should be, contested, but it's a possibility. I'm just saying, folks. I'm just saying.
Unlike other countries, Germany doesn't allow you to deduct your mortgage interest payments from your taxes, unless you rent the place out instead of living in it yourself, which that's encourages the renters market more. Also, German banks are generally a little more conservative when giving out mortgages and often require a 20% down payment, while in the UK, you usually only need 5 or 10%, and in the US, you can get a mortgage with a down payment as low as 3%.
Yeah, I was about to say, here you can be more lenient. However, I would recommend just to make a down payment as high as possible. You don't want to pay for that house, for 30 years. All of a sudden, that house, let's say, cost you $200,000, you end up paying almost $1 million for it. I'm just saying, you don't want that, right?
Or in some cases, even zero. At the end of the day, this just keeps the threshold of entering the real estate market a little higher than in other countries, and especially excludes people with a lower income. What's also pretty high by international standards are the transaction costs for home purchases in Germany, which makes buying a home and especially frequent moves less attractive. Last but not least, as this article points out, the low homeownership rate in Germany probably also goes back to mentality differences. In most countries, owning your own property is a life goal for many people with a pretty high priority. George W. Bush promised his voters to make the US a homeowner society, for example, and when Brits say things like, "My home is my castle," you can tell that they idealize the idea of
a home, home
as well. Meanwhile, according to the article and my personal experience, most Germans are a little more hesitant when it comes to buying real estate and taking out loans, and with the good renter conditions in the country, renting just seems like a very responsible and reasonable thing
it's convenient. I mean, it just seems like I mean, if you guys want to buy houses and stuff like that, that's fine. But it doesn't seem like Germany is big enough for that, right? Unless, again, if you want to expand some of those urban areas, which I don't think you guys want to, or if you come from a very large tradition of, homeowners, maybe.
That actually lines up perfectly with my personal experience. I kind of mentioned this at the beginning of the video, but I feel like buying a house in Germany is just considered a much bigger step than it is here in the US. It's more like this intimidating adult thing that younger people honestly don't really talk about a lot.
I'm not gonna lie, it's a Peter Pan syndrome. It's just you're making that step, outside. It's a Peter Pan syndrome. No, don't get me wrong. It's scary.
Even in your 20s, because it's not really a realistic option for most of us. It's something that's way down the road or might never be reality for us. Now, of course, I grew up in a big, expensive city. This is definitely a little bit different in rural areas, but I think it's safe to say that buying a house is just a big decision and a big step for Germans. And I experienced the different reactions when I bought my house last year. While most of my American friends were simply excited for me, many of my German friends looked at it as this huge milestone and couldn't even believe that I was able to do this.
Wow.
How easy the process was here. Americans really make this whole house purchasing process seem like the most casual everyday activity. My realtor even told me that she never had a client that asked as many questions as I did, even though from a German perspective, I really just did what everyone who's about to make a big decision like this should do. But she said that most of her clients usually just want her to handle everything and don't really care to understand all of the details themselves. And the
Hey,
signing
that's a
of
German
the final
thing.
purchasing contract took me like 15 minutes. In Germany, I know from my parents that usually takes over an hour because they'll read the entire contract to you.
Hey, but
Here,
that
they
hey,
just
hey, hey,
summarize
but
the
that's not bad. That is not a bad habit though. That is not a bad habit. You should be able to read the entire contract.
contract for me and had me sign the different pages. I also feel like even for Germans who could technically afford it, buying a house isn't even on the table usually until they're sure that they want to stay at that place for a long time, and until then, they rent. You wouldn't really buy a house in Germany when you already know that you're going to move again in a few years. Buying a house is something much more permanent to us.
Yeah.
In general, Germans only move 4 to 5 times in their lives, while
Wow.
Americans move more than 11 times on average.
Yep.
With the yearly
Well,
leases in the US,
man, I move,
especially
man, bro. I move around a lot, man. Wow. If we go back to college, I slept in what college dorms, went outside, stayed outside the college dorms, then moved to Milwaukee. That was Wisconsin, right? No, I'm sorry, Wisconsin. No, I moved to a third home close to my college. Then moved to Wisconsin, Milwaukee. After Milwaukee, I moved to Wyoming. Oh, how many? That's what, 5, right? After Wyoming, I went to New York City, right? New York City, first time. Then moved to my second apartment. Upstairs of that apartment. Then moved to Flushing, New York. Then went back to Wisconsin, downtown Milwaukee. And then moved to upstate Wisconsin. That's 11 time, bro. She's right. I mean, I'm planning to move again next week to a better place because I'm renting, right? I'm looking for a better option because we're saving money to buy a house. That's crazy,
younger
man.
people often choose to move every year instead of extending their lease, and even for families, it's normal to move every now and then. And as I said earlier, just sell your house and buy a new one. So to answer the question of the video, the reasons as to why Germany has a lower home ownership rate than most other developed countries in the world are a combination of the country's history and rebuilding process after World War II, the high quality of rental housing, relatively low rents, the high renters protection, low incentives for homeowners, and probably a little bit of our mentality. If you want to read more about this topic, I linked all of my sources and articles that I used for my research in the info box below. Now I would like to hear your experiences.
Hey, very nice video. I learned a lot. She's right. Hey, I'm happy for her that she just bought her own house. Hey, congratulations. I wish you well for you and your family in the future. That's a big step. She's not wrong. This is a big step. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. How was your process of just owning your own house? How was the process just getting the mortgage? Just seeing the realtor, that the realtor was a good person, that when you bought the house, how long it took you to just build the house. Let me know in the comment section below. In the meantime, guys, I'll see you in the next one.